think about the properties that I have bought, every one of them sight unseen. Had I seen them, I wouldn't have bought them.
You need to really cut through the noise and not really, emotions take over and look at the numbers. What was your strategy as you built that portfolio?
What I focused solely on, just buying up all of these properties who had taken care of themselves, that also had the fundamentals to, at some point in time, provide the capital growth. Even if I'm selling you a dud investment, hold it long enough and it's going to be okay. But we don't want to be in a position where we had to try and recoup all the stress of having a property that doesn't grow, just to eventually hold out long enough for it to finally grow and return some of your money. Passive income doesn't come at the beginning. It's passive outgo that you get in the beginning. And it is hard work. But if you wait the time out, you're not going to have to worry about whether or not you can get a bit of extra in the pension this week. Until you start, you can never finish. Your first property isn't going to come and knock on your door and sell itself to you.
Welcome to the Property Addicts Australia podcast. Today we are interviewing one of the most respected voices in property in Australia, Margaret Lomas, founder of Destiny Financial Solutions. Margaret has been helping investors for decades build solid property portfolios. And Margaret was an amazing inspiration for Mona and I when we started our journey back in 2009. Margaret, welcome to Property Addicts Australia.
Well, thank you for having me.
Firstly, for us and our audience, we'd love to hear your story, where you started and what you're all about.
Well, I started so long ago, it was well before either of you were even thought of. And probably when your mum was still a fairly young woman, I would guess, because I've always had a bit of an interest in property ever since my own father, when I was 19 years of age, really encouraged me to get into my first house at the time. It wasn't a house, we couldn't afford a house back then. It was 1979. I was 19 years of age and engaged to be married, as we often were at that age back then. My father said, you have to buy a house. You need to get into the property market immediately. And what we could afford at the time was a one-bedroom unit in Cabramatta. I still remember it. It had lovely lime green shag pile carpet. And we just thought it was the bee's knees for us to have our own property. We needed to come up with a $2,000 deposit for that. We paid $34,000 for it. Actually, no, we paid $28,000 for that. We had a home loan approved for us through the local building society, who held a meeting once a month and decided who were the winners, who were going to get the loans at the time. We had a little coupon book, and I would go down to the building society once a month, fill out that coupon and pay my $308 a month, which is what I paid on that mortgage. So I guess that was really where my own property journey began, but my own investment property journey didn't begin until I was almost 40. So I think it's critical for those people who are thinking about becoming property investors to really know that it's not getting too late if you're only in your 20s. I had a number of own homes through that time, but I didn't actually start thinking about property as an investment till I was 38, almost 39 years of age.
So what triggered the thought that, okay, this is the path you wanted to follow at that time?
Well, at that time, we had already started our own business, which is Destiny Financial Solutions. So we started that in 1996. It's now almost 30 years old, which to me shows great longevity in this business for a financial services business to still be going after 30 years. We had, and when I say we, I talk about my husband and myself. It was my second husband. I had 5 children under the age of 10. We both had reasonably good jobs, lived in Perth at the time. I owned a training business. He was a police officer. But on the side, we had started a business which was aimed at helping people to budget and pay off their mortgages sooner. We helped people to understand the power of using a credit card for your expenses, offsetting interest off your own home loan with the money that you would otherwise use on expenses, pay that credit card off once a month and pay off your mortgage earlier. And we then supported them in that journey by visiting them often and looking over their budgets and being that helping hand to make sure that they stuck to those budgets and achieved their goals of paying off their own loan sooner. And that's what the business was in the beginning. So we brought that business to the East Coast. We wanted to move here. My family is from here. We felt we had a better opportunity to build that business at the time from the East Coast. Technology wasn't quite what it is today. So it was harder to do business right across the other side of the country. We brought that business over to the East Coast. We began the business. We started to get some really good local clients who really liked the idea of paying off their mortgages early. And then once we had done that on our own mortgage, we started to look about for ways to then plan for our retirement future, which seemed a long way off at the time. I'd watched my own father battle through to retirement with his own business. Department of Main Roads put a road through his business. He approached retirement with not a lot left over due to a lot of unfortunate circumstances. And I told myself that I wasn't going to be in that position where I was going to be a burden on the government, or where I was going to have to suddenly go into a lifestyle that I wasn't used to by then of really budgeting and not being able to spend money and not be able to travel. So I was really highly motivated at that stage. Once we paid off our own mortgage, we thought, well, maybe property investing might be a great way to go. But back then, there was very, very little written about property investing. So we started to buy property ourselves, made a couple of grave mistakes in the beginning, but managed to make it work in the end. And as we then started to acquire our property portfolio, go on our own journey, learn more about what we were doing, we were able to pass on that knowledge to our clients and then develop real strategies that meant something around how to invest in property. And I still believe that apart from Jan Summers, who wrote a wonderful book about residential real estate investing a long time ago, nobody had ever really talked about the big fundamentals in property investing, like all of the things you need to know about areas, economics, demographics, specifics, growth drivers. Nobody had written about those. Nobody knew about them. And we were really the first people to introduce those concepts to a property investing Australia.
I'm curious, Margaret, what was your strategy as you built that portfolio? Like, what type of properties were you targeting? What sort of cash flow? What were you looking for?
So around that time, a lot of people will remember that Robert Kiyosaki was becoming very popular, and he talked about never ever buying a property investment that didn't have a positive cash flow for you. So we started to think about whether that same concept could be overlaid into the property investing landscape. And it wasn't always easy to do, but the more we learned about property investing, the more we began to develop these ideas around being able to search for property which was positive cash flow, while at the same time you kept an eye on the capital growth prize at the end. I think early in my career as a property advisor, and even back then there was no such thing as a property investment advisor. There's another whole story around how we developed the property investment professionals of Australia and started to get that recognised as a career, I guess. But at the time, I think a lot of people made an automatic assumption that you had to choose between either getting a cash flow investment, because typically they were situated in areas with high rents in relation to purchase prices, and probably in areas based on single industries which fluctuated in their capital growth potential from time to time. Or you would choose a property that could grow well, which everybody assumed meant you would buy in the city or big cities. but what you had to forego was that cash flow, because you'd have to put money out of your own pocket for them. They would have a lower relative rent return for what you were buying. And I think a lot of people thought in the beginning that's what I focused solely on, just buying up all of these properties in presumably in regional areas or mining towns that gave me good cash flow but would never grow. When in fact, what we were developing were our ideas around being able to initially get into properties that were going to give us the cash flow we needed to stay in the market and to accumulate more properties because we could afford to do so. The properties were taking care of themselves, but at the same time, recognize and separate out those positive cash flow areas that also had the fundamentals to, at some point in time in the future, also provide the capital growth. And that's how it's panned out for us, because in the beginning, we owned quite a lot of property in areas that other people wouldn't buy in because they just figured that they were in some kind of remote area or outer suburbs or areas that weren't going to deliver the growth. And it got us through and enabled us to build a really large portfolio that then came into its own, delivered great capital growth, and of course increased our asset base to the point where we well achieved and surpassed our financial goals.
So it's not really overnight, really. It's work done over a long period of time because sometimes people want a get rich quick scheme, but property is not that.
It's definitely not that, but there's a few cautionary things that I would like to say here. First of all, any property, I guess, over a long period of time will still grow in value if the period of time is long enough. And we have to be very careful of the spruikers who say it's not market timing, it's time in market. Because what they're essentially saying is, even if I'm selling you a dud investment, hold it long enough and it's going to be okay. But we don't want to be in a position where we would have been better off putting money in the bank over that time or in a term deposit than we are buying this dud investment because of all the trauma it gave us in the early years, or the negative cash flow that we had to try and recoup, or the stress of having a property that doesn't grow, just to eventually hold out long enough for it to finally grow and return some of your money. Time in market and market timing become equally important. But to answer your direct question, yes, you do need time. And I do recall many periods of time in those early years, and I'm even going to go so far as to say in the first 10 years of the portfolio, with the exception of those one or two properties that we timed so well that we got in just before a boom. There were times when it did feel like we took a step forward with a new property just to take a step backward because of the expenses and the stamp duties and, those potentially early years when we were waiting for rents to grow to get that positive cash flow. It felt like we were taking a step forward and a step back and a step forward and a step back. And for a long time, I would look at my monthly spreadsheet year to year and not notice my net worth growing overly much, because every time it would grow, I'd dip into it, use it, and go again, and waste, I guess, a significant portion of that growth on those expenses. But it wasn't until we were really wide in our base, and then we started to get through a couple of property boom cycles in various areas, that suddenly that whole snowballing that you see in the charts really did occur. So, from one year to the next in the last couple of years, it's been massive leaps and gains in that net value of the portfolio. And many people won't wait till that time. They want to use the money for something else in the meantime, and they get out. I think patience is definitely the key.
Cash flow, though, is it still possible with the current rates, the strategy that you applied to go positive cash flow? Because in capital cities, we are finding most properties are negatively geared. What would be your suggestion to investors to hold it out through this period?
We have to always recognise that you can invest in capital cities without it having to be the CBD. And in fact, history has shown us that outer suburbs with the right fundamentals will give you and deliver a better overall capital growth over time than those CBD properties will, with less risk. And I say less risk because you've got a growing demographic that typically grows in the outer suburbs, particularly when you find those ones with less land components, so less available land. They typically grow once they start to get really overgrown in terms of their population, and then they burst and boom. Whereas the city is already built to its maximum capacity unless there's more apartments going up. Certainly the inner city or the inner suburban areas of cities. So they're never going to be able to increase their population any more than they're already at because there's no new land to build new space for people. Whereas these other areas eventually get to a critical mass and then they boom because there's suddenly no more new land and they boom. So buying in those suburbs initially usually gives you a better return on your money in terms of your rent. So relative rents in the suburbs to your purchase price are typically a little bit higher. There are other ways that you can maximize cash flow, of course, and most people who are interested in property investing will know what they are. And that includes things like understanding what you can depreciate. Not as good these days. In my day, when you bought a property, you could depreciate all the fixtures and fittings with a new effective life, which gave us a boost in cash flow in those early years. But certainly you can still depreciate a building, and if you add anything to a property and renovate or do it up, even if it's a smaller reno, then there's extra on paper deductions that you can add to a property to help with those cash flows. And it's understanding that those extra tax breaks, you can get those every week in your pay to help you with that cash flow. But typically, unless you are prepared to go out to some of those areas where there may only be one industry and rents are 7, 8, and 9% instead of 2, 3, and 4% of your purchase price, then you're probably going to have a negative cash flow in the early days if you're financing 100%. So financing through equity, that's probably what you're going to have to bear. That can place a limit to how quickly you grow the portfolio, because if you buy a property that requires $100 a week from your pocket, then there's only so many lots of $100 a week that you might have, particularly today with the cost of living crisis that we're going through.
So, Margaret, talking about outer suburbs, sometimes these areas have stigma attached to them. So, in those instances, what would you say? Because I think we like talking about crime, for example, right? Like often our buyers agency clients, they raise it up, but the crime rate is this in this particular area, or this is way further out. But affordability means that that's the only pocket that they could afford in. So, what would you say to someone who is grappling with that stigma or that the crime figure or what they're reading online?
Mhm. What I will say is that in all of the writing that I've ever done, I've never mentioned crime as a negative growth driver because I've never found higher crime to directly impact on whether a property will grow that has the fundamentals. So let's get that right. The property or the area must have those fundamentals in the first place. So those fundamentals include things like a council that's looking at, beautifying the area, a council that's adding infrastructure and services for families. And make no mistake, it's families that drive growth more than any other demographic. And the reason families drive growth more than any other demographic is because when families move into an area, they put their kids in school, and typically somebody with children wants to see their kids in the same school for the period of their schooling, whether it be one school from K to 12 or whether it be a primary and then a high. They want their kids in that one school. So they've really got to be pushed to move to a new area because it's so disruptive on the kids. So if you find an area that's got the right kind of services to keep those families in that area, So not only a school that's local, but then what the kids need, like after school services, before school services, parks, sporting facilities, and those things. So if an area has those things, the council's focusing on providing those things. If an area has not too much new land, but people are demanding the housing, then that area is going to grow. And even if there's crime there, it's going to grow still. I have bought quite a number of properties in areas that would be considered to be areas of higher crime. And yet those properties haven't done any less well over time than properties that are in areas that don't have any crime. So I think we've got to be very careful when we're buying properties and investment that we don't let our personal emotions and feelings impact on what, when, and how we buy and where we buy, because many of those emotions aren't valid in the property investing landscape.
Well, when we were building up property portfolio, a colleague, when we were in the corporate world, a colleague said to me, "Why don't you buy properties in more respectable areas?" Because we were buying properties out west in Western Sydney, and he was more from the eastern suburbs, so he looked down upon it. And I think, from my perspective, if I had listened to people or my colleagues at that time, I would have done nothing.
Exactly. And I think one of the biggest furphies is saying that you wouldn't buy a property that you wouldn't live in yourself, because I can tell you that in my large portfolio, I don't know that I have many properties that I would live in myself. And yet people, and that doesn't mean that they're terrible properties or they're necessarily in terrible areas, but people are generally by and large respectable, whether they're in lower socioeconomic groups or higher socioeconomic groups. And I do find that people from the eastern suburbs do tend to look down their nose at a lot of things. And I think just having status and money and a good career in life doesn't make you a different person or any more respectable or valid than someone who doesn't have those things. So I think we've got to be very careful of that and understand that lower socioeconomic areas actually have more room to move than higher socioeconomic areas, because I've seen many of them change dramatically and go from being an area that people didn't really want to live because it seemed like a bad area to being one that suddenly becomes quite in demand. A great example is Redfern. When I was a kid, my mum even worried about me going through Redfern on a train, because my train into the city from where I lived out in the southwestern suburbs in Padstow had to go through Redfern. And mum used to be sure I knew not to get off in Redfern because it was such a dangerous area. Well, now people are clambering to live in definitely parts of Redfern. And it's a great example of how you can't use how you feel about an area to determine whether that area is going to be the right place to invest. Not all ugly duckling areas become that beautiful swan, but many do.
Well, we had a mentor who says pleasing methods are pleasing results, and as property investors, our aim is pleasing results, not necessarily pleasing methods. Margaret, I know you're quite big on talking about, in the property industry, there's property advisors, right? And many of them being spruikers. I'd love for you to shed light on that.
Look, it's critical if you have decided to become a property investor, because I can tell you now that there's nothing at government level that will protect you as a property investor. So you must protect yourself. When we first decided that we would become property advisors, it was on the back of me completing a financial advising course for 4 years and becoming a qualified financial advisor. And then I took all of the things that I'd learned on how to be a financial advisor and overlaid that into becoming a financial advisor who advised people on how to buy direct property, which means property that you get off realestate.com domain. Back then, of course, we didn't have those websites. So directly off a real estate agent. And we helped people to work out how to do that and how to buy direct property. It was unusual at the time because financial advisors back then would be paid by the investment on advising their clients. There was no such thing as a fee for service back then. All financial advisors would be paid by the managed fund or wherever they got their clients' money invested. And it's only been in more recent times that that's no longer allowed and you have to charge professional fees. We charged professional fees just like an accountant would, and that's how we would explain it to our clients. Just like you pay your accountant, you will pay us, and we will help you to learn how to do all of this. It was unusual. No one had ever done it before, but pretty soon people were jumping on the bandwagon. And what we saw alarmingly happen is we would see developers who were developing maybe blocks of units or house and land packages in far north Queensland, retain staff that they then called property investment advisors. They'd get clients, they'd examine their financial circumstances and say to them, well, based on what we know about you, this is what you should buy. And it was always that developer stock. And the reason they did that is because developers were paying $40,000 in commissions on the sale of a single apartment or a single house and land package. I was definitely offered a lot of money during that time to act on behalf of developers, which is obviously something that I would never do and never did.
Sorry to cut you off. We get phone calls often from developers, agents to sell their stock, and they're shocked when we're like, oh, this doesn't fit our investment criteria.
And you could make a lot of money if you did it. This is
Yeah.
the thing. It wouldn't be the right thing to do, but there's a lot of money in it. Now, the fact that there is no laws in Australia that govern property investment advisors, and that often shocks people, because to be a financial advisor, you're overregulated. To be a real estate agent, you're overregulated. To be a property investment advisor, you're not regulated at all. And so you can say, well, I'm sick of being a steel engineer. Tomorrow I think I'll become a property investment advisor, and bam, you're a property investment advisor. No questions asked, no license needed, nothing. And so that should scare people, because it means that we get unqualified people who most likely have something to gain by becoming that property investment advisor rather than truly wanting to help people. So many, many years ago, I, along with a couple of very wonderful people who were also trying to run their own property investment advising business, who were prepared to put their hands in their pockets, as did I, we began an association, a not-for-profit association called the Property Investment Professionals of Australia. And we set about trying to, first of all, bring in some kind of an educational course that was a requirement for people to call themselves property investment advisors, an association with membership, and thirdly, try to lobby the government to see whether we can somehow hang off the Australian financial services legislation, a little bit of a law to cover also property investment advisors. Well, I think I worked at that for a good 12 years and couldn't get the government to commit. It was really ASIC who needed to be involved, and they weren't interested in working any harder than they were already working. So while we didn't get the legislation, and still haven't to this day, we did get a fabulous course and a post-nominal QPIA, and an association which today is quite large and covers property investment professionals. And my recommendation is always that you should seek out people who are members of that association, because at least you know that they follow a set of ethics, they follow rules, they are educated to deliver the information and advice to you. But if your advisor isn't a member of that, at least understand what that member needs to do. And if they are recommending property to you that they are in any way benefiting from, they don't have to tell you if they are, by the way. They don't have to disclose that to you. Then I'd run, because it's not independent advice.
Well, I've had clients where their financial planner has bought them a property in their super fund and their own personal name, and one of the properties didn't go anywhere. And then for the second, they were recommending another property for her to buy in her SMSF, and I told her, well, you need to ask what are they actually getting paid, and they refused to actually declare to her what they were actually getting paid. So when people say to us as buyers agents, but I'm getting a free service there, there's no free service, really.
No, there's not. In fact, it's probably a very costly service because you'll end up with a property that's probably not the right one for you. It probably hasn't had the right kind of research done on the property. There are two aspects to property investing. One is buying a property that's appropriate for your financial circumstances. So something that a 25-year-old buys is going to be different than something that a 55-year-old buys. They'll probably be in different areas. They'll be different property types. But secondly, the property itself and the area that it exists in is fundamentally important to you. And it needs to be in an area that has all those future fundamentals, not an area that's a hotspot today. There's no point in buying in a hotspot today because you're too late. You want to buy in an area that's a hotspot tomorrow. And so these financial advisors, they're actually taking money from the developers to supplement what they're not getting from their other work, their financial advising work. They don't have to tell you how much it is, but I can tell you it's a lot of money. And in doing so, all they're doing is they're saying to their clients, you need to invest in property. Oh, here's one. Why don't you buy this one? Without really giving any thought to whether that property even exists in an area that is an area they should be buying in.
Well, Margaret, early days in our own investing careers, we had mortgage brokers try to recommend us brand new properties, and thankfully we did not buy them. But they pretty much refused to even educate us on the mortgage process because we refused to buy their stock. And that's really unfortunate. And that's what motivated Mona and I to do what we do. That because we paid deposits on two brand new properties when we first started out. And thankfully, the valuations didn't stack up. The selling agent was coached us. He's invested a lot of time in us. And he was quite devastated that we weren't proceeding with the deals after the time he had invested in us in coaching. And that was we lost $2,000, but that was the best lesson we learned in our journey. And we've since been anti brand new properties. And when real estate agents, when we're buying for clients, established properties, real estate agents might tell us about these properties. And I'm like, look, so far in my journey, it hasn't made sense. Maybe one day it might. I'm not saying I will never buy it, but so far in 15 years in property, it hasn't made sense. So if I'm not going to buy it for myself, I'm not going to buy it for my clients.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And that's a great strategy to have. And those early people who you lost the $2,000 on, they put a lot of time into you because they were very well paid to do so. It was in their best interest to put that time into you and to try to convince you that what they were selling to you was the next best thing. But in reality, they don't know anything about the real property investing journey. They are salespeople. Make no mistake, that is what they are. Salespeople. Mortgage brokers, it's a very competitive industry. A mortgage broker doesn't make a lot of money until they've been in the business for a long time and built up a loan book. So in the short term, they do take on developer stock as salespeople to sell them to you because they're the ones who can get a double whammy out of that. They can sell the stock and get a commission and also get the money off the mortgage as well. And so they're not trained at all to be property investment advisors, and it's quite alarming. And while the mortgage broking industry is regulated, it doesn't regulate any property investing advice that they're giving. And it's regulated to the point where you need to be licensed, but it's still pretty easy to become a mortgage broker as well.
Even though in practice it's quite hard being brokers. Recently, I helped a couple where they actually ceased working with their previous broker because the broker actually wanted to refer them to their partner to buy brand new stock, and they just didn't feel right about it. I guess fortunate for Mona and I, we did our numbers from day dot, and that's where these brand new properties weren't making sense. One, the banks weren't valuing them, and two, the numbers didn't work because the strata fee was so high.
I think we need to be careful that we don't throw all brand new properties under the bus or throw the
True.
baby out with the bathwater, because definitely there are times when a brand new property could be something that works quite well for you, particularly if you're developing. I know, I've developed quite a few brand new properties myself, and they work out great because I get a huge amount of depreciation off them. And if you can do that sort of thing, it can be good. But it's who you buy it from, I think, that's more critical than what you're buying. So if you're finding a brand new property that could be for example, a spec home that a small builder has just built. He might have built two spec homes in a suburb that you work out is a good suburb to buy in. That brand new property might be okay and is going to be better for you probably than the house next door that's established in that same area that you've already worked out is the area to buy in, because its depreciation is going to be greater than the house next door, giving you a better cash flow even at the same rent return. You've also got a brand new property. It's going to be longer till you have to spend money on things like hot water services and things that break down and go wrong. So under those circumstances, a brand new property could be the right thing to buy, but not when it's whoever in far north Queensland selling you a brand new property from a big bunch of these properties they're developing, or in a big apartment block in a suburb you've never heard of. A quick story: my first property was sold to me by such a dodgy developer, and who eventually did go bankrupt many years later. But he was developing a lot of property in Cairns at the time, and his stock was typically apartments in a block of 8. And I was a newbie and didn't know a lot about investing in property, but just knew that I wanted to invest in property. And I was swayed by the fact that this particular apartment was going to have a positive cash flow on it, because the purchase price was such that my rent return was good enough to create a positive cash flow. So I think I blanked out everything else. They did give me some lovely glossy brochures that gave me a lot of information about all the good things about the area, which of course was Cairns, all the great things about this area. But I took all of that at face value, because they're not going to give me a glossy brochure that tells me all the bad things about the area. And so, great beaches nearby, but the beaches are pretty awful up there and you can't swim in them anyway because of the stingers. They had all of these things. 12,000 or 10,000 people a year move into the area. They didn't tell me that 12,000 a year move out of the area, leaving a net deficit in population. And so there are a lot of things that I wanted to hear and didn't do any further research myself, because they were compelling. They had all of the professionalism, and to me it seemed like the thing to do. And I held on to that property for a long time. Luckily for me, it did have a good rent return, so it didn't really cost me any money. But I think 22 years after I bought it, I finally sold it. And I bought it for 180,000 and I sold it for 260,000. And that's not much of a gain for 22 years of
Yeah,
waiting.
for sure. For sure. And Margaret, in today's day and age, there's so much technology and there's AI, a whole heap of things. And when I look back on our own journey, when we found your TV show and we watched it religiously, it was all about going back to the basics, really, and applying those basics and analyzing deal after deal to get a good understanding of what makes a good property, or what are the things that we would avoid. So now with the advancement in technology, what's your view of where the industry is going? Does it take the human element out now? Can anybody go just buy property just like that?
Mm. I think we have to be careful. I'm sure anybody who's into AI that they know that AI, if you're using chatbots like ChatGPT or Perplexity, that AI does actually hallucinate. I don't know if people are aware of that. It makes things up when it can't find the information. It does make things up. I've had some pretty funny things made up by ChatGPT, and so it will hallucinate. So it can't be necessarily relied upon. But I guess more importantly, while AI is going to become a very important tool, because it's going to decrease the amount of time for you to get information you need if you know the questions to ask and if you know how to validate the information that you're getting back, there's still a human element that's required. I know one of the things that we do with our clients, and we use a bit of AI because we help our clients to invest all over Australia. We use a little bit of AI there to help us to at least chuck off areas that aren't going to be any good and apply my 20 questions to Australia to narrow down those areas that look like they're going to be the best areas to invest in the future. And we certainly got people in Perth well before the boom, into Townsville well before its boom. And, clients made several $100,000 from that. That was AI helping us. But at the end of the day, it's us who have to go, okay, that's great, but is this area right for you? Because only we know your individual personal circumstances. Only we know whether you've got 5 years till retirement or 25 years till retirement. Only we know how much you earn and how much you spend, and whether you can afford to hold this property should things go well or should things go badly. So you still need that human element. And as you know, in what you both do, that human element to find the properties and assess them and sift through them and get down to the one that's the best possible choice for your client. AI can't really do that because it just doesn't have that human element, which is partly also about instinct.
Yeah.
After 30 years in this industry, I have to say I have an instinct for
Absolutely.
areas
It's
and properties that are going to be the ones to buy. And AI doesn't have that instinct.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like it's gut feel many times when we're looking at a property. No, something's not right, and it's just lots of things that we've built up on over year after year after year, analyzing deals.
Yeah, well, we had a client who said, "Oh, what are the things you're looking for?" Because sometimes it's such a mental checklist. You might look at a property and right away say, this has issues, right?
Mm.
Things like backing a main road or backing a car across a car park, for example, just a small example. And then
Yeah,
we went back and actually did an audit of how many things we look at, and we came up with at least 60 things, and that list is still growing that we still can add to. So
yeah,
AI can't necessarily tell you a bad property.
Or even
yes,
data can't, because we had someone come to us and they were looking at properties based on data in like a town with 2,000 population. And we said, well, you need to look at the fundamentals. Sure, the data might say all great things, but you need to look at the big picture before
yeah,
buying.
absolutely. And also, I think we have to take into account that as human beings, if you're not a trained professional, your emotions will overrule you. A great example came across me or to me just yesterday. My daughter is looking to buy a property locally here. She lives in Melbourne, and that her and her husband would like to come maybe up in the winters and spend winters up here, which would be great for us. There's two on offer that are in their price range at the moment, and one is 500 metres further away from the beach than the other and near a pub. Now, the one that's near the pub it's got a pub on one side and a school on the other side, and it's beautifully presented. Now, the other one, which is only 250 metres from the beach, needs some work done, but at the end of the day, they'll probably both come in at the same sort of price because even with the work done, it's going to be very similar. Interestingly enough, my daughter just wants to go for the one near the pub
Because it's
because
presented nicely.
she can't, she's emotional about it. She can't walk into it and just blank her mind out and go, right, if I did this, and this to it, suddenly I've got the same property as near the pub, but I'm 500 metres closer to the beach. And that is all in this area where I live. It's going to feed into capital growth, and she wants to Airbnb it when they're not here. So it's going to feed into the capacity to Airbnb it and make money along the way. I've got to convince her this weekend when she comes up how to think unemotionally. And when I think about the properties that I have bought, every one of them sight unseen. So I bought them without seeing them, and many of them I still haven't seen to this day. I saw pictures, and the ones that I did see after I'd bought them, had I seen them, I wouldn't have bought them.
Yeah.
So not only are emotions bad in maybe helping you to buy a property where you're careless and you just love the look of it and think of yourself living there and don't look at whether the property is actually any good for you. But the flip side is true. You might reject a perfectly good property because you look at it and think, oh, I don't like this. And I've got a number of properties that when I did eventually look at them because I needed to renovate or do whatever to them, I thought, I never would have bought this property if I'd come to see it. But wow, look what it's done for me.
Well, that's an interesting story. And like we bought a property just over a week ago for a client in Melbourne, and that property had been on the market for 30 plus days or so. Turned out that apparently it was priced higher than, what people were willing to pay for it, and they had just reduced the pricing. It needs new carpet, new paint, new blinds. It has got new kitchen and newish bathrooms as well. And our clients like, why? But nobody's bought it. Like, why should I actually buy it? And all these things pop up in your mind or doubts. But you need to look at that deal. Actually, it's probably in my view anyway, it's deal of a lifetime, right? Like she's gotten in without any competition, whereas people are fighting over properties in
Well,
that particular area.
within 5 kilometers from the beach, and well, 200,000 less than the area median, and with a suburb like well, we bought it for 965K, that property for the client, and the next door suburbs median is $1.6 million. So
Mm.
like that's where the capital growth will move. That's what I expect.
So I think you need to really cut through the noise and not really, as you said, emotions take over, and look at the
Mm.
numbers and say, okay, well, maybe it is a good opportunity. Maybe
Mm.
look at it from a different lens.
I think it's also good to point out that whole ripple effect as well, which is what you're affecting with buying that property. And that's that if an area becomes out of the price of the average person, people are still going to want to live as close to that area as they can. And those ripple suburbs will definitely grow in value. And we've seen this happen time and time again, where we get our clients into those areas that are adjacent to a really well sought after area. They pay hundreds of thousands of dollars less, and within a few years, even less, that gap has closed right down and there's barely any difference between the two. And this is what happens. But these are all the kinds of fundamentals as well that AI can't pick up on, that you need a human to be able to help you to identify them. And you also need to buy very unemotionally.
And Margaret, moving to your 20 must ask questions, your book, could you please talk us through the 10 and 10, how you divide them and what they're all about?
So the first 10 are really about the area. So they look at really important fundamentals like the demographics. More importantly, I think the trends. And I think trend analysis is something that very few people know how to do, and they don't even know what trends are. So the trends of population growth, the trends of buying behaviors, the trends of um, infrastructure development. There's a whole lot of different trends that you've got to be able to look at in an area and analyze. Those first 10 questions look at the prices generally in the area, how quickly population is growing, who makes up the population, and so that helps you to know what kind of property is most in demand. It looks at all of those area specific fundamentals. The second questions then delve more deeply into the immediate area around the property and the property itself. So things you need to know about that street, things you need to know about that particular property and what it is. Is it 2 bedrooms in an area where everybody wants 4? And that's why it's cheaper. Is it how old is it? Does it have any depreciation available on it? There's a whole lot of questions to ask about the property itself, if you're not going to be there to look at it, that you need to ask. So once you've asked the 20, you've pretty much left no stone unturned to work out whether that's the right area to buy in and then the right house to buy in that area. The two very important parts of buying, one is area and second is then the property type and information about the property before you buy.
I think people often focus on the area and they forget about the house itself. And they might even buy a property on a massive roundabout and not realize.
Yes. It's funny, isn't it, that I think people often say that that's why they need to go there to look at it. But I don't necessarily agree with that, because these days we do have tools, and this is getting back to the digital, that we can use. We can use Google Earth to have a good look around. I walk up and down streets with Google Earth. There's so many different ways. You can get a local area property manager who you would give the work to, if they do these things for you, to go and have a look for you. If it's not a property that's on their books, go out and have a look for me and tell me whether this is habitable. Go and inspect it for me. If you think it's a good rental, then I will give you the rental. real estate agents are valued by the size of their rent roll. And so the more rentals they can get, the better. Many property managers will be happy to do that for you. Eyes on the ground if you can't be those eyes on the ground. And honestly, flying all around the country to look at properties is just not feasible. It's not tax deductible.
Mm.
It wastes your time when there are plenty of other ways that you can get that same information.
Backtracking a little bit, when we started recording this podcast, you mentioned that you paid off your home and you were helping people do the same, and that's when you kicked off your property journey or as an investment journey. What would you say to someone who's in the process of paying their mortgage, and mortgages are might be very different to what they might have been when you were paying off your mortgage? So what would you say to someone? Should they wait to pay off their mortgage, or do they just wait for equity to build and then kickstart their portfolio?
I wish I'd known what I know now when I first bought my first home, because if I did know that, a few things would have been different. Firstly, I never would have sold my first home to get into my second one. I probably would have kept it, although that can be a financially bad decision depending on how much you owe and how much you're going to pay on the new home. You don't want to be upside down financially with a low deductible loan on an investment property and a big own home loan. But certainly what I would have done somewhere along that way, because as I traded up into slightly bigger homes as I went along, I would go into each new one with more equity. I certainly would have unlocked that equity a lot sooner than I did. So if you think about the fact that I was almost 40 when I bought my first investment property, I'm 65 this year. So I've now built up a significant portfolio that has a significant amount of net worth in it. My loan to valuation ratio to this day is only around about 23%. So I only have about 23% debt on my current property portfolio. If I'd started 10 years earlier, imagine what that would
Yeah.
look like. And that would have been a time when nobody was really buying property as an investment. So I would have been a really early adopter, even though I was an early adopter anyway. I think there's a couple of things you've got to balance off here, though. It's all very well to say, I've got $200,000 equity in my own home, I'm ready to buy. You might not be, because if all you're doing is managing your own mortgage and that's stressing you, I would say you're not ready to buy, because you have to anticipate the worst case scenario, not the best case scenario. And the worst case scenario is that after you buy an investment property, interest rates will go up and your rents will go down for whatever reason, or you'll have periods of vacancy and you need to prop up that mortgage at the same time that you're propping up your own. Unless you also have some personal cash flows that enable you to support another property in the worst case scenario, then you shouldn't, now's not the right time, regardless of how much equity you've got. But if you've got equity and you also feel you've got a little bit of wiggle room in your own budget, then my advice is to start sooner rather than later. It's not as easy to borrow money today as it was when I was first starting. Banks just threw money at you pretty much. My bank manager would just come around to my house and my place of business and go, yeah, we can do that for you. Just sign here and we'd have money. It was great. It was probably not great for some people. It was great for my husband and I because we are highly disciplined people. We knew how to get ourselves into situations that we could get out of if necessary. We weren't big spenders. We still aren't to this day. So my kids will probably be the happy recipient of all the hard work that I've done, because we just have a fairly simple lifestyle. So we were able to understand that, okay, we're getting this debt, but we'll take that seriously and we know we can afford it if things go horribly wrong. If you're not that kind of person, then I think wait longer again. So depending on who you are, how much equity you have, and how much personal cash flows you can afford to contribute, then you work out from there when the right time is for you. But just remember, the period of time when we had 2% interest rates and you could buy a property that would look after itself without you putting any money in, that was a really unique and rare slice of history. In all of my time buying property, right up until that moment in time, in the early years of a property investment, I always had to invest some of my own money. Like any investment that you're going to get, any investment requires a bit of your own money going into it. You buy managed funds, it's your money that you buy it with, or if you borrow to buy managed funds, it's 30% of your own money has to go into that. So to think that you can buy property with no money down and no money in and no money, no money, no money, and then just benefit from at the end, that's quite I guess, a naive way to think, and it's a dangerous way to think. Unless
But
you're prepared to commit to really slashing your budget and tightening your belt and going without things in order to have more at the end, then property investing is probably not the right thing for you to be doing.
But Margaret, there's so many ads these days, right? No money down, it won't cost you anything, positive cash flow. I think a lot of first time investors are a bit confused, and for the right reasons. It's not their fault because that's what they're hearing in the marketing world, unfortunately.
Or generate X amount of passive income, but passive income is the end goal, really. It's not necessarily that you're making it today. Sure, you're planting the seeds today, but you have to pay off that asset to get to
And
that.
that's a fabulous thing for you to say. Passive income doesn't come at the beginning in any way, shape, or form. It's passive outgo that you get in the beginning. You need to be prepared for that passive outgo. Passive income absolutely comes in the end, and it'll be a significant amount of passive income. And if you do it right, you'll not only have that passive income, but you'll also have a huge asset base that you can begin to liquidate if you need to along the way for those bigger ticket items, like maybe a massive trip around the world or whatever it is that floats your boat. For me, it's not boats and things, but travel is definitely one of my weaknesses, and I do spend a fair amount of money on travel. But if you do it right and you hold on long enough, and you're careful about who you listen to, you're careful about what you buy, you make sure you understand your budgets, and you're prepared to give up some things now, which is very difficult in this day and age with social media and FOMO and what you see going on around you. It makes it hard. But if you're prepared to do all of those things and put in the hard work, and it is hard work. I can tell you now, a property portfolio like mine is hard work, and it's still costly. At the moment, I've got about $30,000 worth of expenses across the portfolio waiting to be paid from things I didn't expect. Some broken gutters, some ruined floors, a whole pile of things. So it's hard work and there's money involved. But if you wait the time out, if you put in the effort, if you go solidly and never take your eye off the end, then you will get both good passive income and a really substantial asset base. And you're not going to have to worry about whether or not you can get a bit of extra in the pension this week.
Totally. And going back to the expense that you mentioned, that's where you also need a really good property manager or property managers across your portfolio, because you need someone who will look after your asset and
Mhm.
the property is well maintained.
In one of my books, and I can't recall which one because I have written 9 of them, but in one of my books, there's a whole chapter on how to select, interview, and maintain your property manager, and how to put in place strategies to get out of a bad property manager quickly if it ends up being a bad one. So, people think buy the property, oh, sit back, that's it, it's all over. There's no way it's over. It requires a lot of management from there, and it also requires. And in my monthly newsletter, which is about to come out, I hope you both subscribe to my monthly newsletter. But I was just writing it before I came onto the podcast. I do talk about the importance of market timing, not just for getting in, but also for getting out, and how critical it is for you to be aware of what's happening in your market the whole time you own a property.
And Margaret, could we talk about regional cities versus capital cities? I know you've bought quite a bit in regional, but you've also bought in capital cities. Like,
Yes.
what would be your
Uh,
take?
Yeah, and at the moment, my portfolio is pretty much mostly in capital cities, albeit suburban capital cities. So I don't own anything in a CBD. My properties are all in the suburbs. But I did buy some properties in regional areas, and it's critical to note that I said I did buy them and I don't own them anymore. And to me, you can make really good money in regional areas, and there are definitely regional areas where you can slice 10-year periods out of time and see that they've outperformed their city counterparts in that period of time. But market timing becomes a little bit more important in your regional areas, both going in and going out, because they can boom really well and significantly, but they can have protracted periods of stagnation. And so depending on when you need the money and how long you've got, it could be prudent with a regional area to get in and wait for a little while and get back out again, bearing in mind that there's always capital gains tax to pay, and you do have to think about that before you do get out. But a regional area can deliver a significant windfall to you if you know when to buy and when to get out.
I'm just curious, how many years on average would you say someone needs to hold in these areas?
So that's a good question because there is no answer to that. It is area specific. So it depends on what's happening in an area. When it comes to, say, a mining town, then you've really got to be a bit of a genius and you've got to have your fingers on the pulse of industry and the share prices of things, of the commodities that are being mined in that town and the futures of those commodities as well. So that's a really specific way to invest. I know people who invested in Moranbah, for example, and made a huge amount of money, but unfortunately, those same people didn't get out in time and lost a huge amount of money as well. They also lived in the area. So the same industry that they relied on for work, they relied on for their capital growth in their portfolio, and they lost both at the same time, which is that would have been a silly way to invest really. So if you're investing in a mining town or a town with only one industry, you need to be all over that industry and understand how it's working at any one moment in time. If it's just a general regional area, there's plenty of other things you've got to look at. For example, Ipswich, which was considered very much a regional area, has almost become part of the extended Brisbane CBD area now because it's not actually that far out. All of the new roads brought it in closer and people made a lot of money out of Ipswich, and now it's become a Brisbane suburb. So that's a great example of a regional area that you would have kept and not sold because it performed all of a sudden really well, but then kept on performing at a good pace along with the rest of Brisbane. Places like Toowoomba, which have quite a lot of influences around it, is doing really well at the moment, but you have to understand what those influences are to work out whether or not they're going to keep going. Areas like the Central Coast, where I live, always considered to be regional. During COVID, the government couldn't decide whether we were going to be Sydney and taken into account with the rules there or regional and left out of the rules, and invariably we were one or the other from week to week. It's now really become part of the greater Sydney area now, but for a long time it was a regional investment. But then you get somewhere like Tamworth, it's never going to become part of a bigger city because it's nowhere near a big city. So it's going to require really precise timing.
Well, I know you spoke about Far North Queensland and the flashy brochures, but unfortunately, people are also buying established properties in some of these mining towns right now, and often people just say, "Oh, it's because the data says so," and it's very scary because, as you said, right, what is happening in that area? What are the fundamentals? What industries work there? I mean, personally, our strategy has been capital cities, and that's not to say we won't buy in regional, but you have to look at the fundamentals and what
I
will
think if you
drive
just
growth.
Yeah, I think if you're just starting out as a property investor, stay away from the regions because it does require a lot more skill. Whereas capital cities, especially suburbs of a capital city, are much easier to assess and easier to get a feel for, and less likely to leave you with an investment that's worth very little. But some of these regional areas can be highly risky. I remember a property expo I spoke at many years ago where someone was selling, it was in Perth, and someone was selling properties up in Karratha, and they were selling it for $1 million for what was basically a 3-bedroom shack, like established properties, a small, almost, they call them dongers up there, almost a little donga, selling them for $1 million. And I was up on the stage telling people not to buy them, more or less, without saying don't go to that store and buy them. I was more or less saying don't buy them. And one of the girls from the stores grabbed me at a cocktail party that was being held for the stall holders and had me up against a wall and basically said, "Why are you telling people not to buy?" I said, "Because I think it's a bad idea for people to buy them." She goes, "No, don't be silly. We've got that much iron ore up there, and you're just being naive if you think these properties aren't going to be worth at least $1.5 million in 2 years' time." And I said to them, "Yeah, you've got a lot of iron ore, but yeah, don't have the countries who are buying it from you. It's not worth anything to anyone in the ground." Anyway, sure enough, within 2 years, those $1 million properties were worth $350,000.
Wow.
And so the people who owned those properties and had bought in at 350,000, and I actually had a client at the time who'd bought 4 properties in the area at the 350,000, and when they got to 900, she sold out of them. We said, "Get out now, get out now." So
Lucky.
she did okay, but there were plenty of other people who rode up to $1 million and rode straight back down to what they'd paid for it.
Yeah, we've met some of them, unfortunately. And, you don't realize it until, like, when you're in your 20s or 30s, you don't really realize it, but time is so valuable. And
Yes.
it takes a few cycles to get that growth. So it's so important to get it right. I know you
Mm.
don't know what it will cost you to get into the market with the right property, but we can't tell you what it will cost you to not do it the right way. That will be way more costly, and you can't put a price on it.
Yes, and I think the thing too is people just think with some of those areas that can really perform like crazy, people say to themselves, "Well, that's fine. I'll buy now and I'll just write it up." But I can tell you now, people never get out because they get up sort of high. This client of ours who got out at 900,000, that was a brave choice for her to do, and she could have made more if she'd stayed in a bit longer because I think they peaked out at about 1.1 average, but she made a lot of money, and she said, "I've already made a lot of money and it's all I need." But people, like anything, like a good share or a good horse that you're betting on, it's winning. It's making money now. People don't want to get out when it's winning. And if you try to get
Mm.
out when it's on its way down, it's too late. Nobody's going to buy off you in a declining market, and you will ride that property all the way down.
Or you will be the
And for people,
liquidity. You will be the liquidity for those getting out of the market.
yeah, and it's so illiquid and it's very hard to get out. It's easy to get out as it's going up. It's hard to get out on the way down. And if you are a young person, those mining towns might have one of those booms in your hold period, but they might not as well. There's plenty of examples of areas that were booming mining towns that are just ghost towns today and have never ever recovered. I think Broken Hill is a great example of a town that was a big mining town long time ago, when I was a child, but there's nothing there, so it's got no other fundamentals to hold it up. Mind you, there are some mining towns that do have other fundamentals as well. So I'm only talking about mining towns that are based solely on the mining. At the end of the day, Perth and Darwin are just both big mining towns, but they have plenty of other things going for them as well.
So, Margaret, then we've been talking for some time now. If you have any tips for our listeners, or someone starting out or in their journey, like what would you tell them?
I think I'd tell them, first of all, to not think that you're smarter than the experts, because it's not about how intelligent you are. It's about being educated and experienced in the area of property investing. So, you probably find, like we do, that we have clients who are lawyers and doctors and very high achievers, and they don't just use us to help them buy property because they don't have time. They do it because they know they don't have the expertise. They're trained in a
Mm.
particular area and we're trained in another area and they defer to us. It's like I wouldn't do my own appendectomy because I've never been to medical school. So if I wanted to buy property and I'd never learned how to buy property, why would I buy property for myself? Makes no sense to me. So the first thing is, it doesn't matter how clever you think you are, get an expert to help you, but be careful about who that expert is. We've talked at length about spruikers and how to protect yourself from the spruikers. And I think at the end of the day, if the property person who is advising you isn't going to charge you anything, then they're a spruiker. It's as simple as that, because you can't get things for free. If you're getting it for free, that person isn't the benevolent society. They're not helping you out of the goodness of their own heart. They're getting money somewhere, and you can guarantee that it's a lot of money that they're getting.
And ultimately, you are paying for it, really.
You're paying for it. You'll pay for it through a bad investment, or a number of other ways you will pay for it. I guess the second thing is that even when you do get an expert, you still need to have some education yourself. And just like the two of you did, watch some shows. Unfortunately, I'm not on Sky News anymore. There's no business channel anymore. So, we can't watch that. I've certainly got hundreds and hundreds of small pieces of information in little vidcast form on my website that are free. At least watch those things, and get that basic education so that you know when to pick a bad deal yourself. You know when you're getting led astray. Become educated. And I think the third thing is that understand a few really important facts. Not all property will do well. Market timing is critical as time in market. Those two things are as important as each other. Being widely read, like I said, is very important. You've both said you've read books, you've read my books. Read a lot of books, get a real feel for how you want to invest. But I think more importantly, don't procrastinate and keep thinking about it all the time. The moment you feel financially capable, and that's a combination of equity in your own home, a cash deposit, and the ability to manage up and down cash flows, then get started. Whenever I used to speak at Property Investment Expos, every year the same people would come to me and say, I heard you last year and I was so motivated, and I went home and the kids got sick and the cat threw up on the rug, and pretty soon life just went crazy and I never got around to it. You need to get around to it, because until you start, you can never finish. Your first property isn't going to come and knock on your door and sell itself to you, and you're never going to buy your second property until you bought your first.
Thank you so much, Margaret. It's been a masterclass today listening to you, and I am sure our audience is going to love this episode. Thank you so much for making the time for us today.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been fabulous, and keep up the great work.
Thank you.